Okay, guys, so today we're going to be checking out a request from Archangel 1862, and this is from PancreasNoWorks. It's called The Emperor is a C-Tier God. Now, is this accurate? Yes. It's actually staggeringly accurate. If you take a look at deities from other franchises, other places, the deities of the 40K are staggeringly limited in the scale of their power and the scope of their power. Now, you might ask, well, how is that the case? He powers the Astronomicon. He does all this other kind of stuff. He manifests saints and everything like that. Those are all very true, but at the same time, they're not the absolute gobsmacking holy crap powers that you see in other places. In fact, at this power scaling level, the gods of chaos, if you could really call them gods, and the emperor are on a they don't even deserve to be in the same class of category as other franchises, like, D&D, things of that nature. The chaos gods are basically bloated, parasitic, well, I wouldn't even call them organisms that all, seek to perpetuate, what gives them power. The emperor is getting to be the same thing because of the worship of just untold trillions of people. But we're going to get into this. I like the way that PancreasNoWorks puts together his arguments because, sometimes, he makes statements like this and then he backs them up, which I want to see how he backs this up, even though I'm already in agreement with him on this. Here we go.
Oh, I talk a lot of smack about the Emperor, I'll freely admit it.
Yeah.
I made a whole video about gods that are better than him, after all. I think it's becoming more and more apparent as things like the Horus Heresy go on that he kinda deserves it. Call it his true self and intentions being revealed, retconning into horrible lore, or whatever you want. He's been shown to be a bit of a jerk. And the first thought Gilliman had upon speaking to him since his reawakening was, gee, Dad sure is kind of the worst, isn't he? I don't think it's unfair to say that there's no shortage of gods that are better at being gods than the Emperor is. But that being said, for some reason I've been feeling a bit more charitable towards him lately. Not enough to say he's a good god by any stretch of the imagination, at least not across the board. But I did some thinking, and honestly, at least by the standards of 40K and Warhammer in general, old MP isn't too bad.
No,
there are
he's
certain
really
areas
not.
he excels at in the realm of divinity, and certain areas he falls flat on his face. And
the problem with the Emperor was, and my whole series Mistakes of the Emperor is dedicated to this. The Emperor just simply couldn't understand. He had a love of humanity, but he didn't understand it. And he was competing for the soul against humanity, against creatures that literally are made of this. Are made of the essence of that. But he was so far removed from humanity whatsoever that he really couldn't relate to the common drives and everything else of the common person. So when he tried to put his plan into motion, it simply fell apart by proxy of him just not knowing what the people that he was actually trying to lead out of darkness were actually all about. Not even his sons.
Overall, as you can probably guess by the title of this video, I would place him at a solid C tier in the god tier list that I've decided exists now. No, this isn't a tier list video, but let me walk you through my thought process on this, and hopefully you'll see the Emperor in a bit of a new light, be it a more or less favorable one. Quick bit of setting the groundwork here, I'm not really factoring in power, because by the standards of power alone, he's probably the strongest individual deity in Warhammer. Gork and Mork either fighting together or combined into Gork and Morka could probably take him, but that doesn't happen very often, and I don't think anyone else can. Kane or
okay, so let me just say this too. If you're saying, oh, can he beat yes, he could roast Goku's mind out of his body frame in a split second. There is no question about that.
Surian in their heyday probably could, but certainly not now. And his very nature is anathema to the Chaos Gods, so even if, say, Khorne is stronger than him, I still think Olympi could defeat Khorne in a 1v1. Which would take place, of course, on Rust, where all 1v1s do. No, I'll be judging him based on how he is as a god and a variety of categories you'll soon see that are largely based on his followers. Oh, and I'll also be including fantasy and AOS gods. It'll be more fun that way. First area of divinity, his followers, numbers, and strength. In this one, I think the Emperor is pretty solidly in the lead as a god. The Imperium is the dominant force in the Milky Way, with trillions upon trillions of people worshipping him as their deity. While other gods certainly have more followers, such as the Orcs and Skaven, the Emperor is hardly lacking in the numbers department. The Chaos gods, while still having plenty to their name, definitely don't have as many worshippers as he does.
Right.
Even taking into account every single traitor, Astartes, guardsmen, and cultist, the Imperium has more, which essentially means the Emperor has more. And if you take into account gods like those of the elves or indeed the Eldar, it's not even close. There are nowhere near as many Eldar as there are humans. It's as simple as that. Sure, at the height of their empire there might have been, but that's not when the Emperor was a god, now was it? So I don't think I can count it, even being the elf simp I am. I mean, there's probably only thousands of Harlequins in the galaxy. Maybe in the low millions tops if you really want to get ridiculous with the numbers in 40k and really want to give the Eldar some credit, which I do, so let's go with that. Compare that to the uncountable billions in the Guard alone. Almost all of humanity in 40k worships the God Emperor, lending him strength and giving him the edge compared to the other gods of the Warhammer settings. Even taking into account fantasy and indeed Age of Sigmar, the titular god of the setting doesn't have every single human firmly in his camp as the Emperor largely does in 40k. Many worship other gods, such as Cain or even Gorka Morka. Other gods that largely have an entire faction devoted to them are in the same boat, as well as mixing in things holding back the gods of races like the Eldar. Tyranian Teclis, despite not presiding over a dying race like elves usually are, still can't compare to the Emperor's followers. Even taking into account the scaling of AOS being a bit smaller than 40k, the T-Twins don't have anywhere near the complete dominance of worship the Emperor does over either the mortal realms as a whole or even over all the elves alone in AOS. As for the power of his followers, the Emperor can count on the Imperial Guard, the Sisters of Battle, Mechanicus, Custodes, and of course the Space Marines, just to name a few. While yes, the Space Marines and Custodes generally don't consider him a god, they still fight in his name and carry out what they believe to be his will. I still personally think their belief in him as their ruler lends him strength in the same way the average person's belief in his deity status does. And even if it doesn't, they're still fighting in his name regardless, so they still count as a follower of some sort. And while the Mechanicus' view on the Emperor varies quite heavily between believing him to be the Omnissiah, an aspect of it, or being an asshole who strong-armed the Cogboys into following him, they still fight for him and alongside his more direct followers enough that for the sake of this category, I'm counting them as well. He has the mightiest and most effective force in Warhammer by sheer virtue of its number and variety. I firmly believe 1v1 the forces of the Eldar, Necrons, and Tau can fight the Imperium and win. Be it because of better training, psychic might, tech, or a mix of all three, I think they've got the advantage. Especially the Eldar, may Osirian guide them to victory. But the Emperor has such a variety of forces in such extreme numbers that eventually his followers will come out on top in any 1v1 situation.
And see, the thing about it is, when you're looking at it, everything he just said there is very true. The average Eldar has thousands of years of experience in combat. That's the average Eldar warrior. Has thousands of years of experience in combat. On the other hand, your typical Imperial Guardsman veteran will have maybe 8 to 10, maybe. And then you look at the Necrons, who are millions of years old and fought in the war in heaven. And then you take a look at, the Orcs, which were literally created for war. I'm not even going to mention the Tyranids. Really not.
Granted, this is ignoring any super weapons like the Necrons or Eldar have, because then it just turns into mutually assured destruction. He doesn't have the mightiest followers in Warhammer, or even the one with the best tricks. Saint Celestine may fall to certain greater demons if they play their cards right, and if I remember correctly, the Celestine Prime one-shot a demon the size of a small country. I don't care how hard you masturbate over Space Marines, the Celestine Prime could put any of them in the dirt. Only fitting, of course, he is Karl Franz after all. But he has an abundance of good enough followers, so in this category I put the Emps at the S tier. As for the loyalty of his followers, however, now the Emperor's fallen down the ranks. I'll give him a C- for this category, and here's why. The majority of Imperials are firmly loyal to the Emperor, or at least are in a position where they have no other choice but to be loyal. Problem is, enough of them turn traitor that it frequently leads to entire worlds being destroyed. Imperial governors frequently fall to Slaanesh or Tzeentch, and a hive city without at least some amount of chaotic presence is a hive city that only exists in the imagination. Hell, 9 of his kids betrayed him, and that was when he was walking around still talking to people. For every dozen guardsman regiments crying for the Emperor and believing it with all their heart, there's a couple that would readily switch teams to stay alive, and a couple that would be outright happy to shed some blood for the blood god. Imagine a Harlequin betraying Kegarak,
not so much.
being corrupted, consciously...
Yeah, not so much on that. I'd say out of every probably... now, the Horus Heresy was a different matter altogether. That was before religious indoctrination. But nowadays, it's the number of guardsmen that would turn would be far, far less. For every regular... I'd say for every 100 regular IG, there's going to be one that turns traitor. Just one.
deciding to turn against him. That's not happening, it just isn't. They're far too fanatically devoted to Kegarak to do so. The same holds true of many other gods. Plenty of Chaos cultists are firm believers of their patron gods. This may be a mistake on their part, but misplaced loyalty is still loyalty. Greenskins are almost universally devoted to Gork and Mork. The odd one might turn to Khorne or very rarely Nurgle, but they are few and far between. And even if it's only because it's usually a one-way ticket, as a whole, Chaos followers generally don't turn against Chaos.
Right.
Once you're in Nurgle's big, disgusting family, you're usually in for life. And if you try and leave, they'll take your life. Aside from that one group of them that earns you a spot in the book if you ever talk about them, no dwarf would ever dream of turning his back on the ancestor gods. While elves do join cults of Slaanesh, these are relatively infrequent occurrences, at least compared to the amount of people that turn away from the Emperor. And while the Skaven might only do it out of fear, they still worship the horned rat with all their little rodent hearts.
Yes.
But he's still not the worst god in this department.
No.
While the Stormcast most definitely are loyal to Sigmar, the standard human in Fantasy or AOS isn't that much less likely to fall to Chaos than in 40k. Sigmar doesn't make you work in a factory 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, so it isn't as bad with him, but it's still a frequent worry. Also, take note of what I said about Chaos followers staying loyal to Chaos. Notice how I said they generally don't turn away. Tzeentch in both Fantasy and 40k has had followers tell him to go to hell. Spoilers for what else but Godric and Felix ahead, so cover your ears and jump ahead about 15 seconds if you want to avoid that. During the Siege of Prague, there was a Chaos cultist of Tzeentch that throughout the story had more and more doubts about what he was doing, and his dying act was to save a family member of his from an assassination that he had planned. In 40k, Ahriman doesn't even like Tzeentch, and of course there's Rylannor letting Vistario blow Fulgrim straight back to hell. I know infighting between the Chaos gods is nothing new, but I just feel like Vistario had a bit of a revelation about Chaos as a whole. Maybe I got the wrong message out of it, but I say it stands to serve my point. Also, no spoiler warning for Rylannor, because everyone knows about Rylannor. There's a fucking song about Rylannor.
And it's an awesome song about
Rylannor. One of
Rylannor.
the first things people know about 40k when they're new to the setting. But to
Alright, guys, 1 second. Sorry about that, guys. So the hospitaler wanted to talk to me for a second. She wins every time. Here we go.
To keep on topic, Tzeentch seems to have problems with his followers having Disney-style moments of heroic clarity.
Yeah.
There's also gods like Nagash. Almost none of Nagash's followers like Nagash. Nobody likes Nagash. Even Arkan just thinks he's the best bet against Chaos, and during the end times outright doubted his choice in bringing the asshole back. Plenty of his
Even Nagash doesn't like Nagash.
followers actively work to escape his service. It's just that he could explode their heads with a thought, so they need to be careful about it.
True.
So overall, in the fields of follower loyalty, the Emperor's in low C tier. Not the worst, definitely not the best.
You see, that's one thing. That's the one thing I disagree with him on. The loyalty of his followers. It usually takes something absolutely horrible, or it usually takes something to the effect of high influence of Chaos or something like that. Normally, they just don't just turn. It normally takes quite a bit of time and effort for Chaos to actually infiltrate. And when they do, you're not talking like entire armies or something like that. You're talking a few regiments out of 100 max. Just to give you an example, when the 13th Black Crusade happened, that was Chaos literally throwing everything it possibly could at the Imperium. And there were regiments that turned traitor. There were quite a few regiments that turned traitor. But you cannot use that as the baseline, because that's like legitimately my only criticism of this. You can't really use that as the baseline, because the entire planet was saturated with Chaos. And if it wasn't Cadia, they would have bombarded the planet from orbit, if not cracked it completely, because of how much Chaos influence was actually on that planet. It's just absolutely sickening.
If he was in a better position for this category, the Imperium wouldn't need to have one of its jobs be blowing up their own planets.
This is true.
Now, how he treats his followers, and more generally how they live. D tier, bordering on F,
Yes.
but just avoiding it, and remember, this is by Warhammer standards.
Yes.
Here's your reminder that living in the Imperium sucks for almost everyone involved. Hiveworld sucks for about 99% of all the people living on them. Even if you don't think it's non-stop factory work day in, day out, there's still rampant overpopulation and pollution. Not
Yes.
fun places to live, and a very hefty chunk of of humans live in those in 40k. Agri worlds also frequently suck, Forge worlds are hell with metal instead of fire, and human rights as a whole in the Imperium are the setup to a joke that ends with you being shot. Not great, is my point. For every loyal Imperial citizen he empowers to fight chaos, for every saint guided by the will of the Emperor, there's 1,000 psychers a day he eats to survive.
This is true.
Yeah, they're kind of being force-fed to him, but that knowledge doesn't unvor the psyker, now does it?
No.
There's also the fact that, like I said earlier, his son said he's not a god worth worshipping. That one just says it all, doesn't it? Kinda hard to argue when the son of God tells you his dad is a douchebag. Now compare that to many other gods. Kegarek will act to save solitaires from Slaanesh when they die, Sigmar pulls people from otherwise certain death to turn them into Stormcast, and actually gives a damn about his followers as people, not just part of his grand plan. And hell, Tyrion and Teclis actively fight alongside the Lumineth. You might say to cut him a break because the Emperor can't do so anymore, but the end result either way is that they're on the field of battle alongside the worshippers and he's not. Something you can't do through no fault of your own is still something you can't do.
True.
Arguably, even some of the Chaos Gods treat their followers better. Followers of Khorne usually want to kill people. Khorne wants blood from killing people. Khorne gives his followers the power to kill people, which gives him blood. It's a mutually beneficial relationship.
Right.
Sure, they live in hell, but that gives them more chances to murder things, so it's not really an issue.
Yes.
Slaanesh cultists may have their souls turned into husks, but at least they're having fun before then. And Nurgle just loves his followers. They're all one big happy family. A smelly,
This is
disgusting family, constantly dying of plague and horrible, horrible diseases, but they don't seem to mind too much. Some of the only gods who inarguably treat their followers worse than the Emperor are Tzeentch, the Horned Rat, and Nagash. Tzeentch will actively screw over your plots in favor of someone else's for no other reason than it's amusing to him, and that's assuming he doesn't just turn you into a chaos spawn to see what happens. The Horned Rat's first appearance in the material plane involved him eating several dozen Skaven alive. He didn't need to do this to sustain his form or anything, he just chose to be a dick. And Nagash is
Nagash.
I don't need to explain why he's a shitty god, he's Nagash. It's very hard to outdo Nagash in the field of being a prick. Unity of his followers. The Emperor gets a B rank. They're all mostly on the same page. Different planets often have different interpretations of the Emperor, and sometimes this causes either religious wars or the planet to be exploded, but other than that, they're mostly on the same page. Except for when the Inquisition and the Space Wolves fight each other and the Space Wolves win because they're bullshit, and the Grey Knights
This is true.
murder anyone who saw them for secret reasons, and the High Lords order a planet destroyed because someone had funny ideas about human rights on it. And about 4 different chapters and different Inquisitor on the and the Grey Knights and different Gargoyle battle killing each other communication causing blood. Let's bump the Emperor down to a C rank.
Yeah,
Meanwhile, there's Tzeentch, who simultaneously has an F rank because his followers betray each other every time they blink, and an S rank because they always play into his plans anyways. Chaos as a whole gets an F because they cannot stop betraying each other, and the Skaven also get an F because of the same reason, except in their case it's almost a biological requirement. Also, they have at least 2 majorly different interpretations of the Horned Rat between the average Grey Seers and Clan Pestilence, and this regularly causes Skaven civil wars, inasmuch as their entire society is in a constant state of civil war, that is. And Nagash gets a D. No one under him likes anyone else under him, and they fight openly and secretly with pretty alarming regularity, but Nagash can murder them with but a thought if he needs to, so eventually they learn to behave for at least a few minutes. And our boy Caleb Menchikane gets a D. If you're thinking, wait, but he doesn't really have any followers, remember the Druki praise him over Assyrian. And the Dark Elves are only slightly less backstabby than Chaos. Granted, Kane doesn't really give a shit because the only thing
Are they really, though?
he likes watching more than elves kill each other is people picking up cursed swords to kill elves with, but still. I guess if you count Exarchs and whatnot to be his followers, then he gets an S, but there's so few of them and no one's really an Exarch because they worship Cain a lot that I don't think their presence is enough to sway things in Cain's favor. Not enough to outweigh people like Malekith anyways. As for gods better than him, Kegarek once again is taking the lead with an S. While the Harlequins certainly don't all have the same opinion on, say, who the biggest threat is, they don't really fight over it. It's more 2 different groups going, I think Slaanesh is the biggest problem, you think it's the Necrons, but we both agree they're problems and we have to deal with both of them no matter which is worse. The Eldar as a whole are usually on the same page about things related to their gods.
True.
Though that being said, Inyad is certainly a point of contention. Even amongst his followers, Yvraine and the Vizarch rarely agree on anything, which is kind of a problem because they're the ones calling the shots. Sigmar's getting an A because his followers don't often fight with each other from my readings. Plenty of disagreements and witch hunters existing prove there's issues to be sure, but nothing like the massive scale civil wars of the Imperium. Elector counts get into petty disputes pretty often, but I see those more in the vein of border skirmishes than anything else. else, or petty honor disputes. Most of the religious disagreements of the Empire are between the cults of Sigmar and Ulrich, who's an entirely separate god. Though I suppose I did give the Emperor credit with the Mechanicus being a separate faction, so maybe I should bump down Sigmar a bit for that same reason. Then again, I like Sigmar more than the Emperor, so he keeps his A because I can happily play favorites when it suits me. Finally, his domain. What is the Emperor a god of, and how effectively does it empower him? He's the god of...
humanity.
Stuff. I'll be honest, I don't have a fucking clue what to call him the god of. The god of the Imperium, I guess, but that feels kinda meh. Like, yeah, a state's god is the god of the state. It doesn't tell you what he is as a god or what he does, it just tells you that the state worships him. Does he gain power when people fight against chaos? Maybe when the Guard or Sisters of Battle do it, but I doubt an Eldar fighting Slaanesh is boosting the Emperor much. Is he a god of order, much like those old chaos gods of order from fantasy?
No.
Maybe, since his nature and power are themselves anathema to chaos, but I'm not really sure that fits either. Plus, there's no one aspect of the Emperor that gives him power his followers can rally around, other than as the protector of humanity. You can be a Talon Desert Raider, or a Valhallan Ice Trooper, or a Sister of Battle, and their different versions of the faith all help empower the Emperor equally. Maybe the Sisters of Battle faith helps more, but that's more so how fanatical they are rather than their specific brand of worship. That being said, he clearly has no problem drawing power from whatever his godly field is. The endless masses of humanity in 40k have spent 10,000 years empowering him to the point that he can light Nurgle's garden on fire without any massive risk to himself. Whatever his mystery domain is, it's clearly boosted his power after 10,000 years of worship. And yet, let's compare him to the other gods of the setting. Chaos gods easily take the lead in this category. Khorne, for instance, is the god of blood and war. When people are going to war, regardless of who it is, he gets a little bit of power from it. Or Tzeentch, when someone is doing a lot of scheming or using magic, Tzeentch benefits a tiny bit even if they're plotting against him. All four of them have very easily defined domains that they draw power from, whether or not the people involved or even their followers. In this, the Chaos gods are completely unmatched as gods. Most other gods have similar situations, just not as potent. The gods of each of the mortal realms in AOS are tied to their respective realm. When it's doing good, they're doing good. When it's not doing good, they're not doing good. And there's other minor gods that, while nothing compared to the Emperor in power, still have very clearly defined domains to get power from. My favorite example is Nakoho, the minor chaos god of unbelief. While being a god of disbelief in a fantasy setting is certainly a bit rough, it's very easy to see who gives him power. If you don't believe in other gods and work to undermine their cults, you strengthen Nakoho. He also looks like George from Seinfeld, because this is a very funny post I found, and it's now how I view him. So to cap off, I give the Emperor a C in the category of domain, mostly because it's just so damn vague. I have no idea what it is, but whatever it is, it isn't hindering him from getting power from his followers in any way. And there's my highly professional and in no way biased list of reasons why the Emperor is a very mid god. Not good, not bad, just kinda there. I mean, he's probably a better god than Zeus. Zeus was a prick. Lumineth video will be coming. I was working on the script and for some reason could not think of what to write. Got absolutely railed by writer's blocks.
So this is the absolute worst helmet I've ever seen before in my life.
So I made this instead. Recording has begun on it though, and I'm on the way to fully finishing the script for it as well. Thank you, as always, to my wonderful channel members, putting up with my writer's block bullshit and general lack of anything resembling a coherent schedule. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to Of course, the only god to get S ranked in everything, including power, is Malal. I bet you were wondering if I was going to mention him. Malal. He exists. I hate him. In fact, I just lied to you. I don't think he gets an S in anything. He gets an S in legal disputes, I guess. And an S in fans constantly asking for him to come back despite his presence legally not being allowed in Warhammer.
Yeah.
And yes, I'm aware of the Sons of Malice. You don't need to bring them up. Much like the Emperor, both Malalelas and his sons are very mid. Another Chaos god, but this one hates chaos. Ooh. Chaos already hates chaos. That's not special. Where's Warhammer Cthulhu? Some eldritch alien being unknowable even to the Chaos gods themselves. And I don't mean like the Catan or the Tyranid hive mind. I mean like Azathoth or Shub I can't say the middle of his name ath. Come on, GW, you ripped off history and Michael Moorcock enough. Where's Cthulhu's love?
Yes. So, that was PancreasNoWork's. I expected him to go outside of the genre. I would say that the Emperor, he says the Emperor is C tier. I'd say he's closer to B in, like, as far as 40k itself. And if you took in AOS, I'm not actually going to discount AOS just because I don't know enough about it to actually give an opinion on it. But if you're looking at 40k, Tzeentch is a D tier. Khorne is easily an A tier. The Emperor would be an A tier. Slaanesh is sadly enough, A tier. Nurgle is S tier, just because of you really can't fight Nurgle. Nurgle is Nurgle. But the Emperor is the loyalty. I thought he was a little bit off on that, but that's just my own opinion. And as far as his domain goes, his domain is simply put humanity. 100%. That is his domain. That's kind of why, because the other Chaos Gods, and I think the reason he's anathema to them is because they're all centered around emotions. He's centered around a concept. So there is a difference there. In any case, guys, that was PancreasNoWork. I'm going to be putting all of his links in the description down below. If you guys would like to see more of him, just put him in my Discord for me, or go check him out go check out his channel. I'm going to have that in the description down below. If you'd like to support the channel, hitting the subscribe and the like button if you haven't already is great. Leaving a comment is even better. And if you'd like to support the other means, I have a Patreon down below. Guys, I'm going to head out. I'm still working on the Yerk video. I am continuing on. And I have done things that make me sad in this one. I will catch you guys next time. Oh no.